And so Michael's in the room, and and let me share screen. Here we go. Okay, so just one second here. Where is my cursor? There it is. Let's see if I can make this. No, don't want that like that. Okay. Okay, so we left off here on page 78 of the PDF, which is, for those using Safaria, Baba Batra 14b. And Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we're on a tangent about the size of the ark that was in the Mishkan and how it was divided to be able to fit different things in it. And we saw above, there was a picture somewhere. Where is it? Of how it was divided. Just a second here. There it is. This is so. How did the tablets of the Ten Commandments fit in the ark, based on the measurements that different rabbis had? So Rabbi Meir said that there was a Torah scroll and the two tablets in the ark, and Rabbi Yehuda said it was only the tablets and not the Torah scroll, because we don't see a Torah scroll in Rabbi Yehuda's version of the ark. So, just a second here, back to 78. There we are. Okay, so having concluded its current discussion, the Gemara now addresses the details of the aforementioned Baraita and asks, just one second here, I just remembered I have to do something. So if I don't write it down, I will never remember. Okay. Let's do that again. Having concluded its current discussion, the Gemara now addresses the details of the aforementioned Braita and asks, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the Torah scroll rested on the chest that came from the Philistines, where was the Torah scroll placed before the chest arrived? So, just we have to understand a reference here, and the Bible class knows a little bit about this because we're reading the book of Samuel now, or the two books of Samuel, where we just started chapter 4, which is details a war with the Philistines and how the Israelites took the ark out of the Mishkan and brought it with them to fight the Philistines. We haven't gotten there yet, but what will happen is that the Philistines are going to capture the ark. And then King David, before he becomes king, is going to defeat the Philistines and bring the ark back. So they apparently the Philistines designed a new chest for the ark, and then, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Torah scroll was placed in that chest. But what happened to the Torah scroll before that? Where was it kept? The Gemara is asking. So, right, because in Rabbi Meir's picture, the Torah was in the ark. But Yehuda says, no, the Torah was not in the ark. So for Rabbi Yehuda, where was the Torah? The Gemara answers, a shelf protruded from the ark, and the Torah scroll rested on it. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Meir, who says that the Torah scroll rested inside the ark, what does he do with this verse? Take this Torah scroll and put it at the side of the ark. The Gemara answers, he requires that verse to teach that the Torah scroll was placed at the side of the tablets, and that it was not placed between the two tablets, but it was actually placed inside the ark at the side of the tablets. So the understanding from Deuteronomy 31 to take the Torah scroll and put it at the side of the ark, is the side of the ark inside the ark on the side, or is the side of the ark the outside of the ark on the side? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, go
It's
ahead, Steve.
but maybe a slightly off topic. Why would they use the case from the Philistines, you would think that they would get rid of that because, the Philistines are, idol worshiping, whatever they were. And why would they use something that they created
Right.
to carry the ark? You would think they would come up with some new thing.
Right. So that's a very good point. And the rabbis base this on the story of the rebellion of Korach in the Torah. So there's a portion that's called Korach in the book of Numbers. Korach was Moses' cousin, and he leads a revolt against Moses' leadership, not an armed revolt, but it was gathering people behind his cause. Like who made Moses leader of the people? Let's follow me. I'm just as if it's based on family, Moses is a Levi, I'm a Levi also. So Korach has 250 followers, and there was a test that God made Korach and Aaron, representing Moses, fulfill, and that is to have fire pans with incense on it. And whichever incense were to go up into smoke of its own would represent that person who should be the leader of the people. And of course, it was Moses's fire pan that lit up. So, what happened to Korach's fire pan? It was made into a holy object for use in the Mishkan. So the Torah tells us that here's a fire pan that was made by a rebel. You would think it would be thrown out or somehow gotten rid of in some way, or be considered a terrible thing. But the Torah converts it into something holy. So you remember the rebellion, but remember that the rebellion was quashed, and that God following Moses and following God remained true. So I think the idea, even though the Philistines wanted to capture the ark because the Philistines thought that the ark was the source of the Israelites' power. So if they could, so their understanding was wrong, but they still venerated the ark. So they didn't do anything. They didn't denigrate the ark. They didn't worship the ark. They just recognized it as some sacred object. And so I think then the rabbis would not have a problem with transforming whatever they did to it into something holy. And that's all. So there's a concept, ma'alin bakodesh. You can raise something up in sanctity. So if an idol worshiper made something, then you can transform it and make it holy. Yeah, Michael.
It's almost the flip side of the idea that ritual impurity conveys from one thing to another. And in effect, here that because the ark was inside this box, the box itself gains something in holiness.
Okay, yes. So there's that too. So yeah, it is interesting that the rabbis don't say you got to throw that thing out. That's an idol worshiper made it and we can't use it. But it's more the opposite, which might seem like it doesn't make sense to do that, since the rabbis seem to be pretty opposed to anything that was made by an idol worshiper or used by an idol worshiper. But here they're saying, no, we can transform it into holiness. Okay, so the Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Meir, where were the silver columns placed? The Gemara answers, outside the ark. The Gemara further asks, and from where does Rabbi Meir derive that the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were placed in the ark? As the verse from which Rabbi Yehuda learns this, there was nothing in the ark except from 1 Kings is needed by Rabbi Meir to teach that the Torah scroll was placed there. In other words, there is this tradition, and I thought it was based in the Torah, that remember when Moses came down the mountain and saw the people worshiping the golden calf, he threw the tablets of the 10 Commandments down to the ground and smashed them, and then after taking care of the golden calf, he went back up the mountain to pray for the people's forgiveness, to pray to God to forgive the people, and then God gave Moses another set of tablets. So what happened to the first set that was broken? And the tradition is that the broken set was put in the ark also. Okay, so they're trying to figure out now where the two rabbis get their proof text for that. So the Gemara answers, he derives this point from what Rav Huna expounded, as Rav Huna says, what is the meaning of that which is written? The ark of God, whereupon is called the name of the Lord of hosts that sits upon the cherubs, 2 Samuel 6. The phrase the name of the Lord teaches that both the second tablets and the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were placed in the ark. And the Gemara asks, and what does the other sage, that is Rabbi Yehuda, derive from this verse? The Gemara responds, he requires that text for that which Rabbi Yochanan says. As Rabbi Yochanan says, the Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, this teaches that the ineffable name of God and all of his appellations were placed in the ark. Okay, so, what exactly was in the ark? There is a very strong tradition that the broken tablets and the second set of tablets are in the ark. There's a strong tradition that the Torah was in the ark, like the original Torah that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai also. And now also some list of the 70 names of God were also inside the ark. The Gemara inquires, and doesn't that the other sage, Rabbi Meir, also require it for that? That is, he needs a proof text also for, and uses that verse to teach about the 70 names of God being in the ark? The Gemara answers, yes, it is indeed so. Rather, from where does he derive that the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were placed in the ark? The Gemara expounds, he derives this from that which Rav Yosef taught, as Rav Yosef taught a Baraita. The verses state, at that time, the Lord said to me, hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone, like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke, and you shall put them in the ark. This teaches that both the second set of tablets and the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were placed in the ark. Okay, so the verse in Deuteronomy chapter 10 is ambiguous. Which them is Moses putting in the ark? The new set or the old set, or both of them? Okay, so since it's ambiguous, we can learn that both the broken and the new were put in the ark. The Gemara asks, and what does the other one, Rabbi Yehuda, learn from this verse? The Gemara answers, he requires it for that which Reish Lakish teaches. As Reish Lakish says, what is the meaning of that which is stated, the first tablets which you broke? These words allude to the fact that God approved of Moses' action, as if the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, may your strength be straight, Yashar Kochacha, because you broke them. So, in other words, it was a spontaneous act on Moses' part, and Moses is known for spontaneous acts, like hitting the rock instead of talking to it in order to produce water for the people. So, and Moses killing the Egyptian taskmaster to protect the Hebrew slave from further beating. So Moses is known for spontaneous acts of violence, especially. So, and he's not, the only act of violence that he's punished for is hitting the rock instead of talking to it. So he's not punished for breaking the first set of tablets, and he's not punished, he's not punished for killing the Egyptian taskmaster either. So, so Yashar Kochacha, what we say This is a traditional word of greeting when that we say to someone for doing something in the service. Someone has an aliyah and they're done with the aliyah, you say Yashar Kochacha, or the shorter Yashar Koach. And somebody leading a service or doing anything else in the service, you say Yashar Koach, like that. So this is perhaps a source for that phrase, Yashar Kochacha. Okay, so the red S, the sages taught the order of the books of the prophets when they were attached together, right? So remember, we're talking about someone who owns a Torah and he dies. No, he has not just a Torah. He has a scroll of all of the Jewish books of the Bible, not just the Torah, but the prophets and the writings. So it's all one scroll. He dies. Two sons inherit the property. Can you divide a scroll like that? That's what we had talked about a couple pages back. So the sages taught the order of the books of the prophets when they are attached together is as follows: Joshua and Judges, Samuel and Kings, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and Isaiah and the 12 prophets. So that's not right. That's not, well, I'm not saying, I misspoke. This is not the way the Jewish Bible is done today. So I believe it is Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then the 12 prophets. So I'm taking a Jewish Bible off my shelf, and let me just confirm that I'm right. Yes. Okay. It's in Bibles that are printed today. The accepted order is, just so we know, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, because that's chronological order. Okay? Isaiah is the oldest or the earliest of those three major prophets, and they're major because of the length of their books. Isaiah has 66 chapters, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, close to 50 chapters. So those are major. But Isaiah was from the time of the northern kingdom of Israel and its exile to Assyria. So like 8th century. Jeremiah is the time of the exile to Babylonia. So that's 6th century. And Ezekiel is in Babylonia. Okay, so that's the order in the Bible. So Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, yes, that's the order. And then just so we know, our Bible's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. But they're saying now in the Gemara, the order, if they're written in a scroll, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, then the 12 prophets. So the Gemara asks, consider, Hosea preceded some of the other prophets whose books are included in the Bible, as it is written, the Lord spoke first to Hosea. Hosea chapter 1, verse 2. Well, it's not just because it says the Lord spoke first to Hosea. We know from the context of the 12 chapters of Hosea that he was from around the same time as Isaiah, which is earlier in like right around the time when the kingdom split after the death of Solomon. At first glance, this verse is difficult, but did God speak first with Hosea and not with any other prophet before him? Weren't there many prophets between Moses and Hosea? Well, to tell you the truth, Samuel is kind of considered a prophet, but he's also considered the last of the judges. So it's unclear if he's just a prophet or just a judge. So yes, there is Samuel. There is the prophet Nathan, who was a prophet during King David's time, but he didn't have his own book. But he's mentioned in the book of Samuel as a prophet at that time. And there are other prophets, but they don't have books that we know of. So weren't there many prophets between Moses and Hosea? And Rabbi Yochanan says he was the first of 4 prophets who prophesied in that period, and they were Hosea, Isaiah, Amos, and Micah. Accordingly, Hosea preceded those 3 prophets, and the book of Hosea as well should precede the books of those prophets. Okay, but it doesn't. in our editions of the Bible, like I said, it's the three major prophets and then Hosea. So it goes out of order a little bit, but it does so because putting the three big prophets first. Okay, the Gemara answers, since his prophecy is written together with those of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi in one book of the 12 prophets, and Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were the last of the prophets, he's counted with them. Okay, so what we're having here is a discussion about how to order the books into the scroll as one long scroll, or how we have it in our printed editions of the Bible today. You know, if you open a Christian Bible, which includes books from our Bible in it, the Christian Bible will put some of these books out of our order. Like they'll take the book of Ruth out of the section known as the Five Scrolls and put it next to Judges. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because the book of Ruth says at the start of it, in the time of the Judges. So it kind of makes sense to put Ruth there chronologically. But for our purposes, like the way the rabbis figured how our Bible should be divided, it's mainly in historical order until you get to the prophets and the writings. And then they are segments each and of themselves. Okay. The Gemara inquires, but let the book of Hosea be written separately, and let it precede the others. The Gemara answers, were it written separately, since it is small, it would be lost. All right, so in other words, the rabbis thought, if we have all of these minor prophets being written in separate scrolls, then we might lose them, especially Obadiah, though it's one chapter long, or the book of Jonah, which is 4 chapters long, etc. So that's interesting that these books were written into big scrolls so that they won't be lost. So, like the book of Job is 40 chapters long, Psalms 150 chapters, Proverbs, you got 31 chapters, right? Eshet Chayil is the 31st chapter. So each of those books are long by themselves, and then it makes sense that the 5 scrolls, shorter books, would be all written together. Okay. The Gemara asks, consider Isaiah preceded Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Let the book of Isaiah precede the books of those other prophets. The Gemara answers, right? That's what I said 2 paragraphs ago. Why would they put Isaiah last and not first? The Gemara answers, since the book of Kings ends with the destruction of the temple, and the book of Jeremiah deals entirely with prophecies of the destruction, and the book of Ezekiel begins with the destruction of the temple, but ends with consolation and the rebuilding of the temple, and Isaiah deals entirely with consolation, as most of his prophecies refer to the redemption. Yeah, that's from chapter 40 in his book until 66, but the first 39 chapters of Isaiah do not. We juxtapose destruction to destruction and consolation to consolation. This accounts for the order: Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah. Okay, so it's just interesting that that's not the order anymore, but it's, for them, they want to go from destruction to consolation. The Baraita continues, the order of the writings is Ruth and the book of Psalms, and Job and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs and Lamentations, Daniel and the Scroll of Esther, and Ezra and Chronicles. So that's not the order now, but that's what the rabbis are saying should be the order in the book of writings in terms of chronological order again. Right? You have Ruth, the earliest of all these books there. Ruth is the time of Judges, book of Psalms, supposedly written by King David. Job, there are different ideas among the rabbis as when Job lived. And then Proverbs written by Solomon, Ecclesiastes written by Solomon, Song of Songs written by Solomon, Lamentations about the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, Daniel in exile in Babylonia, Book of Esther in exile in Babylonia, and then you have Ezra and Chronicles about coming back from exile to the land of Israel. The Gemara asks, and according to the one who says that Job lived in a time of Moses, let the book of Job precede the others. Right? Like I said, there's discussion among the rabbis. When did Job live? I mean, there is some midrash that Job is from the time of Abraham also. The Gemara answers, we do not begin with suffering. That is, but there is a prevailing sentiment among the rabbis that Job is one of the advisors to Pharaoh who met with Pharaoh discussing this prophecy that they had that there was going to be a leader born to the Israelites who's going to be king of the Hebrew slaves and lead them to redemption. And these advisors are trying to make sure, this is why, according to the Midrash, all the firstborn of the slaves were thrown into the Nile, not, as the Torah says, to prevent the slave population from increasing, but to prevent the birth of the Redeemer coming to the Hebrew slaves. So within all those midrashim is the idea that Job was one of those counselors to Pharaoh. Okay, the Gemara answers, why doesn't Job go first before the book of Ruth? We do not begin with suffering. That is, it is inappropriate to start the writings with a book that deals so extensively with suffering. The Gemara asks, but the book of Ruth, with which the writings opens, is also about suffering, since it describes the tragedies that befell the family of Elimelech. The Gemara answers, this is suffering which has a future of hope and redemption. As Rabbi Yochanan says, why was she named Ruth, spelled Resh Vav Taf? Because they are descended from her David, who sated, a word with the word Resh Vav Hey, the Holy One, blessed be He, with songs and praises. Right, the book starts with suffering, right, as Ruth becomes a widow, and Naomi becomes a widow, but it ends with Ruth being the great-grandmother of King David. Okay, the Baraita now considers the authors of the biblical books. And who wrote the books of the Bible? Moses wrote his own book, that is, the Torah, and the portion of Balaam in the Torah, and the book of Job. Joshua wrote his own book, and 8 verses in the Torah, which describe the death of Moses. Samuel wrote his own book, the book of Judges, and the book of Ruth. David wrote the book of Psalms by means of 10 elders of previous generations, assembling a collection that included compositions of others along with his own. He included Psalms authored by Adam, the first man, by Melchizedek, king of Shalem, and by Abraham, and by Moses, and by Haman, and by Yedutun, and by Asaph, and by the 3 sons of Korach. There are psalms that begin with attributions to those names. Okay. Jeremiah, so there's a note. No, okay. Not worth reading. Jeremiah wrote his own book, and the book of Kings, and Lamentations. Hezekiah and his colleagues wrote the following, and a mnemonic to remember which books they wrote is Yud, Mem, Shin, Kuf, Isaiah, Proverbs, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes. Now, that's interesting because there is a prevailing rabbinic sentiment that King Solomon wrote Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes. So this Baraita is suggesting that King Hezekiah, of all the kings of Israel, there's David and Solomon, and then the kingdom split. So of all the kings of Israel and Judah, from Solomon until the exile to Babylonia, there are only 1 or 2 that are considered righteous. And Hezekiah is one of the righteous ones. And Hezekiah then is not only considered a great sage, like he studied he studied the Torah and interpreted Jewish law, but they're saying now that he and his members of his court wrote the prophet Isaiah, Proverbs, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes. The members of the Great Assembly wrote the following, and a mnemonic to remember these books is Kuf Nun Daled Gimel, Ezekiel, and the 12 prophets, Daniel, and the scroll of Esther. Ezra wrote his own book, which I think includes the book of Nehemiah, and the genealogy of the book of Chronicles until his period. The Gemara comments, this supports Rav, as Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, Ezra did not ascend from Babylonia to Eretz Yisrael until he established his own genealogy, and after that he ascended. This genealogy is what is written in the book of Chronicles. And who completed the book of Chronicles for the generations following Ezra? Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. The Gemara elaborates on the particulars of this Baraita. The master said above that Joshua wrote his own book and 8 verses of the Torah. So the Gemara, like the last 8 sentences of the Torah, which we read on Simchat Torah, describe Moses' death and the people mourning for him. So there is this prevailing tradition that Moses did not write the entire Torah, but that Joshua wrote those last sentences so that Moses wouldn't have the suffering. Like if Moses got the whole Torah at Mount Sinai, he's writing about the future of the people. And that's really hard for someone to understand, to know that he's writing about his own death. He's learning when he's going to die. And that's a terrible burden to have to bear, to know when you're going to die. So God relieves, according to some, God relieves Moses of that burden and letting Joshua write the last 8 sentences of the Torah. The Gemara comments, this Baraita is taught in accordance with the one who says that it was Joshua who wrote the last verses in the Torah. This point is subject to a Tanaitic dispute, as it's taught in another Baraita, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there. Is it possible that after Moses died, he himself wrote and Moses died there? Rather, Moses wrote the entire Torah until this point, and Joshua wrote from this point forward. This is a statement of Rabbi Yehuda, and some say that Rabbi Nehemiah stated this opinion. Rabbi Shimon said to him, is it possible that the Torah scroll was missing a single letter? But it's written, take this scroll, indicating that the Torah was complete as is, and that nothing further would be added to it. Rather, until this point, the Holy One, blessed be He, dictated, and Moses repeated after him and wrote the text. From this point forward, with respect to Moses' death, the Holy One, blessed be He, dictated, and Moses wrote with tears. The fact that the Torah was written by way of dictation can be seen later, as it is stated concerning the writing of the prophets, and Baruch said to them, He dictated all these words to me, and I wrote them with ink in the scroll. Okay, so what we have here below the surface is an understanding, or trying to understand, how actually Moses got the Torah at Mount Sinai. Did God hand the Torah to Moses, or did God dictate the Torah to Moses? If God dictated the Torah, why would God then cause Moses the suffering of knowing when he was going to die? And that's why the rabbis are suggesting that maybe God gave the Torah to Moses written up to a certain point, and then let Joshua finish the Torah. And the idea of the dictation, because it doesn't say in the Torah exactly how Moses got the Torah. It says Moses got the Torah from God at Mount Sinai. But the idea of getting the Torah could be understood in a variety of ways. So they're suggesting dictation because in the book of Jeremiah, we know that Jeremiah had a scribe, like an assistant who was his scribe, Baruch ben Neriah. And in fact, there was, I think, in the archaeological dig that is going on in the old city of Jerusalem, which is a matter of debate because it's taking place in what is technically East Jerusalem, Palestinian territory. So if you've been to Jerusalem and you've gone into Hezekiah's tunnel to go underground and through this water tunnel, and this is part of what's called the City of David excavations that are going on. And with those excavations, they've found a ton of material from the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And they even found some of these signet rings or other things used by scribes. And one of the names of one of the scribes found is Baruch. So, the people doing the archaeological digs know their Bible. And Baruch, oh my, if this is Baruch, this could be from the destruction of the temple, not by the Romans, but by the Babylonians. And if this is Baruch, then maybe Jeremiah is real. Like, we don't have evidence that these prophets were actual historic figures. We only have the Bible for that. But if we had something that's related to that, that's found, wow, the name Baruch is found. Now, the name Baruch could be like Joe, not necessarily this Baruch from the book of Jeremiah, but it is interesting. It's from that time of the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, and to have a Baruch there makes it interesting. The Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is that which Rabbi Yehoshua bar Abba says that Rav Giddel says that Rav says? When the Torah is read publicly in the synagogue, one person reads the last 8 verses in the Torah, and that section may not be divided between 2 readers, which is the case today, right? The very last, right, the way we do and the way most Ashkenazi Jews around the world read Torah on Simchat Torah is that the portion V'zot HaBracha is actually divided into 6 portions. And the first 5 are read over and over and over again so that everybody there can have an aliyah. And then the 6th aliyah of V'zot HaBracha, which is the last aliyah of the Torah, is saved for an aliyah known as the Chatan Torah, the person to have the last aliyah of the Torah. And you never divide it. You have to read it through to the end. So those are the last 8 sentences in the Torah. And then we start reading the book of Breshit, and that's a separate aliyah, and that's Chatan Breshit to read that. Okay, so you don't divide that. So in the time of the rabbis, they're saying they're developing the precedent for reading the last 8 sentences as one section. Shall we say that this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon? As according to Rabbi Shimon, these verses are an integral part of the Torah, written by Moses just like the rest. The Gemara answers, even if you say that this was said in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, since they differ from the rest of the Torah in one way, as Moses wrote them with tears, they differ from the rest of the Torah in this way as well. That is, they may not be divided between 2 readers. It is stated in the Braita that Joshua wrote his own book. The Gemara asks, but isn't it written toward the end of the book, and Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died? Is it possible that Joshua wrote this? The Gemara answers, Aaron's son Eleazar completed it. The Gemara asks, but isn't it also written, and Eleazar, son of Aaron, died? In Joshua 24:33, the Gemara answers, Pinchas completed it. It's also stated in the Braita that Samuel wrote his own book. The Gemara asks, but isn't it written, and Samuel died? The Gemara answers, God the seer and Nathan the prophet finished it. It's further stated that David wrote the book of Psalms by means of 10 elders, whom the Braita proceeds to list. The Gemara asks, but then let it also count Ethan the Ezrahite among the contributors to the book of Psalms. It's he who is credited with Psalm 89. Rav says Ethan the Ezrahite is the same person as Abraham. Proof for this is the fact that it's written here, a maskil of Ethan the Ezrahite, Psalm 89:1, and it's written there, who raised up one from the east, Mizrach, whom righteousness met wherever he set his foot. The latter verse is understood as referring to Abraham, who came from the east, and for that reason he's called Ethan the Ezrahite in the former verse. So the name Eitan, it means strong one. And when medieval liturgists write poems that are included in the Siddur, they refer to Abraham sometimes as Eitan. And as Ezrachite, Ezrach, Mizrach means east. Okay, so they make that connection that way. The Gemara asks, the Baraita counts Moses among the 10 elders whose works are included in the book of Psalms. And it also counts Haman. But doesn't Rav say the Haman mentioned in the Bible, 1 Kings 5, is the same person as Moses? This is proven by the fact that it's written here, Haman, in Psalm 88, which is Aramaic for trusted, like the word Ne'eman in Hebrew. And it's written there about Moses, for he is the trusted one in all my house. The Gemara answers, there were 2 Hamans, one of whom was Moses, and the other a temple singer from among the descendants of Samuel. The Baraita further states that Moses wrote his own book, that is, the Torah, the portion of Balaam, and the book of Job. This supports Rabbi Levi Bar Lachma, as Rabbi Levi Bar Lachma says, Job lived in the time of Moses. It is written here with regard to Job, oh, that my words were written now. And it's written there in Moses' word to God, for in what shall it be known here? The unusual use of the word apho in these 2 places indicates that Job and Moses lived in the same generation. Okay, so they're taking it from unusual words in both books that are the same word in both books. Okay, that's a stretch. The Gemara comments, but if that is the proof, say that Job lived in the time of Isaac, as it's written in connection with Isaac, who then, apho, is he that has taken venison. Or say that he lived in the time of Jacob, as it's written with respect to Jacob. If it must be so now, do this. Or say that he lived in the time of Joseph, as it's written with respect to Joseph. Tell me, I pray you, where are they feeding their flocks? Okay, so the word apho appears in the time of those 3 also. The Gemara answers, it could not enter your mind to say this, as it's written in the continuation of the previously mentioned verse. Oh, that my words were inscribed vayehu chaku in a book. And it's Moses who's called the inscriber, as it's written with regard to him. And he provided the first part for himself, and there was the inscriber's portion reserved. Rava says Job lived at the time of the spies whom Moses sent to scout the land of Canaan. This is proven by the fact that it's written here, there was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And it's written there in the account of the spies, whether there are trees in it. Okay, the word eitz is there, and Utz is spelled the same way. Ayin Sadi. The Gemara asks, is it comparable? Here the word that is used is Utz, whereas there the word is eitz. The Gemara answers, this is what Moses said to Israel, that is to the spies. Is that man named Job still alive? He whose years are as long as the years of a tree, and who protects his generation like a tree? This is why the allusion to him here is through the word eitz rather than utz. Okay, so there's lots of midrash about Job, how old he was, how long he lived. Okay, the Gemara relates that one of the sages sat before Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, and he sat and said, Job never existed and was never created. There was never such a person as Job. So this is an unusual statement for somebody, a rabbi, to suggest that a book of the Bible that is attributed to Job and tells the story of Job is a story that is not a real story. Rather, his story was a parable. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said to him, in rebuttal to you, the verse states there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, which indicates that such a man did indeed exist. Then Gemara asks, but if that is so, that the words there was prove that Job existed, what shall we say about the parable that Nathan the prophet presented to David? There were 2 men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb, which he had bought and reared. In 2 Samuel. Was there really such a person? Rather, it was merely a parable. Here, too, it's merely a parable. The Gemara answers, if so, that it's a parable, why state his name and the name of his city? Rather, Job was clearly a real person. The Gemara cites another opinion with regard to the time when Job lived. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar both say Job was among those who ascended from the exile to Eretz Yisrael at the start of the Second Temple period, and his house of study was in Tiberias. Okay, so there's this minority opinion that Job was from the time of the exiles coming back to Israel, not from the time of Moses. The Gemara raises an objection from what is taught in a Baraita. The days of Job's life extended from when Israel entered Egypt until they left, indicating that this is the period during which he lived, and not as suggested in the early days of the Second Temple. The Gemara answers that the Baraita means that the duration of Job's life lasted as long as from when Israel entered Egypt until when they left, but not that he lived during that specific time frame. So that's like 200 years, 200 some odd years that Job lived. The Gemara raises an objection from another Baraita against the notion that Job was a Jew. 7 prophets prophesied to the nations of the world, and they are Balaam and his father Beor, and Job, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamatite, and Elihu bar Barachel the Buzite, which indicates that Job was not Jewish. He said to him, and according to your reasoning that Job could not have been Jewish because he prophesied to the nations of the world, was Elihu ben Barachel not a Jew? Is it not written of the family of Ram, meaning Avraham? Rather, one must explain that Elihu is included in this list because he prophesied to the nations of the world. And so too it may be maintained that Job is included in this list, even though he's Jewish, because he prophesied to the nations of the world. The Gemara asks, but did not all the other prophets also prophesy to the nations of the world? Why then are only these 7 mentioned? The Gemara answers there, with regard to the other prophets, their main prophecies were directed to Israel, whereas here, with regard to these 7 prophets, their main prophecies were directed to the nations of the world. Okay, so it is 10:20, and I have to prepare for my next thing. So we're going to stop here for today. We will meet next week. Next week is April 6th. The week after that is Pesach. That is the first day of Pesach. And the week after that is the 8th day of Pesach. So we're on for next week, and then we're off for 2 weeks for Pesach. So have a good rest of the day, everybody, and be well.
Thank you.